John Glios, welcome. Good to talk to you. The DEI, what's interesting to me is traditionally you'd expect an organisation like yours to be involved in the scientific or the academic world, but here we are in a commercial environment, and that's where a lot of your energy is directed.
Yes, the Durham Energy Institute is unusual, maybe unique, in that we work very closely with both industry and with society. The way in which we integrate with industry is very special indeed. One example, we work very closely with a company which was called Dong until very recently. It was an oil and gas company historically. Now it's entirely offshore wind. It's called Ørsted rather than Dong. And the way in which we work with them is extremely integrated. One of the team, for example, has taken all of the data from offshore Denmark, all the wind farms, and helped Ørsted optimize harvesting of the energy.
Is the international and indeed the national public debate as clear, as well informed as it might be?
No, I think the appreciation of energy, whether it's by the general public or government, is very broken up. For example, we just assume we can switch on the light and light will flood into the room. The link between that and what it takes to create the light is very poorly understood.
So what it seems to me that you're saying is that policy is crucial to all this, and the people that make policy aren't necessarily seeking the opinions of the right people.
Policy clearly drives the way in which every nation, every person perceives and uses energy, and yet I often think it's very poorly informed.
So we think of alternative energy, the members of the public, as wind, tidal and solar. Is it as simple as that?
Wind, tidal and solar, or particularly wind in the UK, has made a massive inroads. We've dramatically decarbonised the grid, but it's only part of the story. If we think about the Northern Hemisphere, the UK, Northern Europe, around about 50% of all the energy we use is used to heat space like this, and yet it's almost invisible. And nearly all of that, certainly within the UK, 70-odd%, comes from burning fossil fuels.
So if government came to you and said, where should we be putting our energies as far as creating heat or keeping the lights on is concerned over the next medium term, 20 to 50 years, what would your list of priorities be?
In the UK, because we are so dependent upon heat, half of our energy comes from, or half of our requirement of energy is for heating space. It really is to tackle that piece. In terms of energy security at the moment, the UK is woefully dependent upon imported gas.
So taking the UK as an example, what sort of natural resources should we be looking at to generate that kind of energy?
The heat itself is valuable, and even a country like the UK, we could have in the order of minimum 100 years supply of heat just from the rocks beneath our feet, whether it's sedimentary basins adjacent to Liverpool and Manchester or old flooded coal mines in County Durham. The second component that we could use is industrial heat. I'm now working with people in Teesside to see if we can move some of the heat from the industry there into people's homes.
So what's getting in the way of you getting that message out, of having these ideas actioned or even tested?
My own perception as to where the hold-ups come in is around, we've not done it like this before. Surely it's risky. No, it's not risky. The technology has been with us for 10, 20, even 30 years. Towns like Heerlen in eastern Netherlands already heat the whole of the city with coal mine heat. It's just that...
And not burning coal.
And not burning coal. Using the water which is now flooded into the old coal mines as a way of district heating.
So if you had the platform, what would your message be?
The message is very simple, really. Don't forget heat. Heat is critical to the way in which our industry, our homes work. And it's also the leftover bit. Whenever we make an energy conversion, think of switching on your laptop. The battery gets warm. The bicycle brakes get warm as you slow down. Every time you do an energy conversion, you produce heat. At the moment, that heat is dissipated. We could use that along with heat that sits naturally within the earth. It's low carbon, it's sustainable, and it will outlast humanity.
John Glios, thanks very much indeed. Good to talk to you.
Fusion energy is the process where we take different isotopes of hydrogen and we fire them towards each other. And if we do that at sufficiently high energy or velocity, these isotopes fuse together to produce helium and a neutron that carries the energy that we can use to produce electricity. This is the same process as goes on in the sun, that burns at about 10 million degrees and produces the heat and the light that we enjoy on the planet. We're taking that process and trying to exploit it to produce the power, the electricity that we need on Earth. The technological challenge for fusion is to hold a plasma burning at 100 million degrees. This temperature is so high that we clearly can't use materials to hold this plasma. We have to use magnetic fields. And those magnetic fields are produced by enormous superconducting magnets. And this combination of magnetic fields and plasma is the essence, is the core of a tokamak. What we've done in this collaborative work between Durham and Culham, under the umbrella of the Durham Energy Institute and the Fusion Centre for Doctoral Training, is looked at the new class of superconducting materials that we could use to make the magnets. So the current machine uses the materials that were available in the 80s and the 90s. In the last 20 years, these new materials have become available, and we've looked at the implications in terms of technological development and cost. In particular, we find that the machines can be smaller, they can run at higher fields, we can add joints into these machines. I'm sure that within this century we're going to see fusion energy. The world will be a much safer, much cleaner place if we can make this technology happen and make it commercial.
I grew up in Denver, Colorado, which is a big energy hub in the US. My parents are both in oil and gas. And so I've always kind of had that interest in energy, geology, that kind of side of it. And I think it's going to be very important for my generation to bridge the gap to a future energy source from oil and gas. And so I'm really interested in the policy side of that transition. Energy and Society was a very unique program that I hadn't really seen before. The combination of the industry side of it and the technical side of it, but also the policy side, and then the society and cultural side of it too, which it's this very unique blend of a lot of pieces that really all of the puzzle pieces kind of fascinate me just in general. It is a smaller group of students, but it's a lot of individual attention and a lot of attention to detail. There's a lot of active discussions in it too, and so I really enjoy the kind of just in-depth, intimate atmosphere of it.
So where we are here, we're above the UK's deep underground science facility here at Bolby Mine. Bolby's a working potash mine here in the northeast. It's the deepest mine in Britain, and beneath our feet is this deep underground science laboratory, one of just a few in the world that laboratories that allow you to do science that you need to be deep underground for.
Well, this project's all about carbon capture and storage, at least the storage end, the way of mitigating some of the emissions of CO2 to the atmosphere, greenhouse gases, of course. And what we're trying to do here is develop new ways to monitor CO2 when it's injected beneath the Earth's surface. The key thing is once we inject the CO2 deep, maybe 1 or 2 kilometres underground, we need to monitor it. And at the moment, the only way of monitoring it is to use an expensive seismic survey, run it once a year, second year, third year, and so on. You only have information when you shoot it. The technology we're using here has the potential for measuring it 24/7. Essentially, the signal is free as well. This technique of monitoring CO2 with muon tomography is successful, it will radically reduce the cost of monitoring and therefore make the whole process of carbon storage, mitigation of climate change that much more possible.
It's an unusual but very enjoyable situation to actually be, first of all, from my perspective, taking my particle physics know-how and applying that to very much a sort of a topical and crucial question. But it's a pleasure as well to be working with colleagues, for example, from the University of Durham in the Earth Sciences department, and colleagues also from Bath and, as you say, NASA, etc. So it's a great example of interdisciplinarity working at its best, and it's a great great group of people to work with.
Well, this is fascinating science, and my department has contributed to it, but here we're at the leading edge. If we're going to deal with CO2, everybody wants to deal with CO2 emissions, we've got to find somewhere to store them. And this is all about finding a safe method of storing them in underground reservoirs, and we could to be sure of the integrity of those reservoirs. And today I've been down and I've seen scientists who are at the cutting edge of this, who are ahead of the rest of the world. Durham University in the lead, but contributions from oil companies that have been working in the North Sea, a range of other scientific expertise. And this is all about establishing ways of checking the integrity of the reservoir and being able to do so in a reasonably cost-effective way without drilling borehole after borehole. So we have here a mining operation combined with a very important piece of scientific research, a lab right underground. I think higher education's gone through a revolution in the last 20 years. There's much more understanding that there are technologies now that can be commercialised. But what's really important about this is Britain is leading the way in carbon capture and storage in terms of Europe. The Canadians are doing some work on it, the Americans are, and if we're to take gashouse emissions seriously, we have to find a way of storing it. And the answer may just lie in the science that's being done in the laboratory here.
The UK is currently faced with potential future energy shortages due to reduced supplies of oil and gas. Geothermal energy isn't new, it's been used by mankind for millennia. The Romans used it at Bath for bathing, and it's strange to think that we are now turning to an energy resource that they used all that time ago. So one thing we're doing at Durham is we're looking at whether we can generate power from lower temperature waters. Most countries globally then could access geothermal resources. We've identified potential in abandoned mines and abandoned oil fields. Previously, as oil fields get older, they produce increasingly more quantities of water, which is typically hot enough to provide heating and sometimes electricity. We could use this, and it could be an important source of geothermal energy. The students at Durham get the opportunity to get involved in some of the research that's going on with respect to geothermal energy. We take the students to look at the mines to enable them to understand the geology at depth and also the geology of the region and how the two fit together. Some of our PhD students may get involved in some of the drilling projects where we're actually drilling boreholes out in the field, and they may do some of the analysis on the materials. So there's lots of opportunities for both undergraduates and postgraduates. Many of our projects are funded by industry, and that offers the students potential in the future for work placements and jobs. The results of our research so far are that we've identified a range of additional resources over and above what was previously identified when the UK was surveyed in the 1980s. So our research could be applied elsewhere and enable other nations to develop their geothermal resources, meaning that almost anybody could use geothermal energy.
Currently, a lot of plastic is sent for incineration or to landfill. If it's sent for incineration, it releases large amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere. If it's sent to landfill, it can leach out into our natural environment. So our business aims to limit these negative effects.
We got the idea for plastic last year at a business school that we attended, where we were tasked to reduce the amount of plastic pollution in the ocean.
Durham University is a great environment for budding entrepreneurs. There's a lot of support available, both academically and from the Careers and Enterprise Centre.
In the face of climate change and increasing environmental, economic and social pressures, sustainable development has become a vital issue for cities in Europe and around the world. Nature-based solutions are seen to hold significant promise for meeting these challenges. They have potential to provide multiple benefits, from managing flooding to securing improved health outcomes for different groups of society. Examples include green roofs in city parks that limit heat stress, city lagoons that store water, and permeable surfaces, vegetation and rain gardens to intercept stormwater.
Yet despite attracting increasing interest, the use of nature-based solutions remains marginal, fragmented and highly uneven within and between cities. Grey infrastructure and technology-driven solutions continue to dominate urban development, from the design of wastewater systems to efforts to improve energy efficiency in the built environment.
In order to explore how innovative nature-based solutions can make a contribution to urban sustainability, the Naturevation project has been funded by the European Commission. Led by Durham University, Naturevation involves 14 institutions across Europe, working in fields as diverse as urban development, innovation studies, geography, ecology, environmental assessment and economics. Our project partnership includes city governments, non-governmental organisations and business.
We will assess what nature-based solutions can achieve in cities, examine the innovation that is taking place, and work with communities and stakeholders to realise their potential on the ground. Naturevation will develop the evidence base and tools required to move forwards. We need to understand the environmental, economic and social benefits nature-based solutions can bring. In addition, new governance arrangements, business models, financing and forms of citizen engagement are required to make the promise of nature-based solutions a reality.
As we move forwards, it is vital that the benefits of nature-based solutions can be shared across society. We will be working to ensure that nature-based solutions address our most important sustainability challenges and benefit those places and communities who need them most. Working with our partners across Europe and internationally, Naturevation will build our capacity to work with nature-based solutions so that they can contribute to making our cities more sustainable for the future.
In the last 2,000 years, Newcastle has grown from first settlements through the Middle Ages and the Industrial Revolution to become the thriving post-industrial city it is today. It often seems inevitable that this process of urbanisation brings with it negative environmental impacts, meaning all too often cities come into conflict with nature. So, like cities the world over, Newcastle is challenged with finding solutions to the question of how to develop sustainably without adding to global issues such as climate change and loss of biodiversity. Historically, efforts to protect the environment have taken place outside the city limits, but there's growing evidence to show that by working with nature, cities can address a range of sustainability goals, from responding to climate change to improving people's mental and physical health. These nature-based solutions use nature's own properties and functions to improve sustainability.
Antarctica is going to be absolutely crucial in the evolution of our planet over the next centuries and thousands of years. We have records that the rate of sea level has been increasing, and we can see this over the last century. And that was actually largely due to the melting of glaciers in the mountain regions. But over time, these glaciers are getting smaller and smaller, and actually that supply of ice is almost going to dry up. And so in the future, it's how Greenland and how Antarctica behave, which is going to be most important for how sea level changes in the future. And that's why we're really focusing on Antarctica.
In the Department of Geography at Durham University, there's a large group of scientists working on the problem of Antarctica. It's more important now than it's ever been because of its potential contribution to sea level. And these scientists have a unique role to play because we're covering the whole range of timescales. So we're looking at thousands of years ago, how big did Antarctica get during the last ice age? How quickly did it shrink back during this warm period that we're experiencing at the moment? And we're studying the marginal areas of Antarctica. We're studying the interior regions to look at the thickness changes. We're studying the outlet glaciers and how quickly they're transferring the ice from the interior to the oceans. And we're even looking at processes that happened just 1 month ago.
One of the unique things about Durham Geography is that we bring together expertise in understanding the past ice behaviour offshore, onshore, and indeed in the centre of Antarctica. And we can combine those in computer simulations as well. We can come up with a much better understanding of the long-term changes of Antarctica in response to oceans and climate.
One of the great things about the Antarctic ice sheet is that it contains some of the thickest ice on the planet. That means that the ice at the very bottom is very, very old. So this data here is from an ice core taken in Antarctica where the ice is about 4 kilometres thick. And we can actually sample the ice and sample the air bubbles trapped in the ice to look at past atmospheres. And what this graph shows is the cycles in temperature over the last 800,000 years. And when you add on carbon dioxide, you can see that they almost perfectly match up. So this provides a very strong link that temperatures and carbon dioxide are strongly linked. And of course what's concerning is that carbon dioxide levels now are almost twice as high as they were in the past.
We're seeing a really interesting signal in parts of West Antarctica actually, that the mass loss there is much, much faster than we expected, much faster than was predicted even just 10 years ago. And what's interesting is because we have the time series of information from the GPS receivers, that the rate of mass loss is not steady over time, but it's actually increasing through time in some areas.
One of the ways in which we measure the ice lost from Antarctica is using satellite imagery. And what we're looking at here is a radar image taken from a satellite that's orbiting the Earth above us by about several hundred kilometres. And what you can see here in the top left of the image is a part of the East Antarctic ice sheet. And then you can see this rumpled pattern flowing towards the darker ocean. And that's a major outlet glacier called Totten Glacier. And from the scale, we can see that this is about 40 kilometres in width. And we're taking satellite images of this glacier approximately every month over a period of a decade or so to try and understand the rate at which ice is being transferred from the ice sheet into the oceans. And you might just be able to make out this glacier moving slightly towards the ocean. It's actually flowing at several hundred metres a year. So one of the things we're using satellite imagery for in Antarctica is we're interested in whether these outlet glaciers are increasing or decreasing in speed. For example, there is some evidence that glaciers like Totten Glacier here are increasing in speed, and they're discharging more and more ice into the ocean, which is increasing the rate at which sea level is rising. And at the glacier terminus, which is marked by the blue line, you can actually see small bits of the glacier floating off into the ocean. These are icebergs, and every time one of those breaks off, we call that a calving event. And each one of those icebergs is several kilometres across, so perhaps as big as Durham City, but in some cases we can carve off much bigger icebergs that might be as big as Greater London. So what we're interested in are what kind of processes lead to accelerations in the rate at which the ice is moving. We're also looking at whether ocean temperatures and circulation patterns or air temperatures are most important in driving some of the changes we're observing.
So a lot of the work we've been doing has been in the Antarctic Peninsula, where we've been doing some relative sea level curves, and we've been doing other work there. And the Antarctic Peninsula is it's almost an unusual part of Antarctica in that the ice sheet there, the Antarctic Peninsula ice sheet, although it's part of a larger West Antarctic ice sheet, it responds very, very rapidly. It's experiencing climate systems that are allow it to change very, very rapidly. The ice is flowing fast. It's a very active system and can change faster than some of the larger, slower bits of the ice that sit inland in West Antarctica.
My research looks at hurricane activity and the position of hurricane tracks through time and how they've changed. And the way that I do this is through a stalagmite record that we collected from southern Belize. And that stalagmite record has a chemical composition that reflects the passage of hurricanes through time. And so looking at that chemistry, I was able to identify that hurricane activity has actually decreased in Central America since the mid-17th century. And comparing that record to other existing documentary records north and along the eastern seaboard of North America, I was able to see that those tracks are actually shifting northward. Temperature has a large effect on the position of hurricane tracks. So as temperatures warm, hurricane tracks naturally move northward. But what our research found was that at the point of widespread industrialization at the end of the 19th century, hurricane tracks actually moved more abruptly northward. And the reason for this is because carbon dioxide emissions are causing the Hadley cell to expand. And the Hadley cell is a band of air circulation that encircles the globe at the tropics. And that Hadley cell has a large influence on the position of these hurricane tracks. Our study suggests that with continued increase in carbon dioxide emissions and a decrease in aerosol emissions, the Hadley cell will continue to increase, and this will drive these storms increasingly toward the northeastern seaboard of North America. And so policymakers should start preparing for more frequent and stronger storms, and the infrastructure should be put in place to deal with them. Well, hurricanes bring with them strong winds, often storm surges, and also a large volume of rainfall that's dropped over a prolonged period of time, and that can result in flooding. So it's important that the northeastern U.S. has the infrastructure set up to deal with these storms. As we saw with Hurricane Sandy in 2012, they can be highly destructive. And what our research suggests is that storms like Hurricane Sandy may not actually be that unusual in the future. They may become more commonplace. So although our study suggests that the dominant hurricane tracks are shifting northward, the rising sea surface temperatures are going to result in a continued generation of storms within the Caribbean itself. And this is important for Central America because although storms are destructive, Central America relies on the moisture delivery of these storms to maintain their annual water budget. And so our research suggests that although storms are moving further north, Central America will probably keep receiving roughly the same amount of storms that they've been receiving over the observational record.
Climate change to become an ever more powerful cause of migration. Climate change is wreaking havoc on the world's diverse species, biosystems and socio-economic fabric. The mass movement of desperate people will become more common, and deaths from serious diseases in the world's poorest countries will rise.
And how do we responsibly capture that multi-causal nature of population movements in a way that policymakers can understand?
And seeing, the limitations on mobility. So people who move short distances or only move to certain places and who are trapped in transit as we,
And our house was underwater. We had to migrate. And that was my experience myself. We had to move to another house.
Decades of devastating activity. The third largest mangrove ecosystem in the world.
Zimbabwe is supposed to have this rainy season sort of November, December, January time going on to February. But none of that has happened.
While we deal with statistics, with figures, we don't always remember the human consequences, the people themselves.
I have to do something about it, and the way that I can do it is by my film.
The equation of carbon emissions with the discredited simply says, look, these are both things. They're worse than junk bonds. They're just nothing. There's nothing you want in them.
Having the International Conference on Climate Change and Migration alongside the art exhibition not only gave it some weight, but also added a critical rigour to the work and how we visualise the issues around it. Unknown to most people, climate change is going to be adding a pretty significant push for people to abandon their homes and to be migrating on a fairly staggering scale.
Change our weather patterns.
Climate change, as well as migration, are both very densely populated by lots of saturated media bombardment, really, of lots of imagery that we get all the time. And one of the things is for art to be able to sort of help people re-engage in a different way with those images.
The art exhibition for us was a way of bringing some of the themes of the conference to the wider public, but also to invite the conference goers to think aesthetically about their object of research.
What strikes me at this conference really is the diversity of the approaches and of the papers. 10 or 8 years ago, most of the papers were case studies investigating the causes of migration. That is, what kind of environmental drivers are leading people to migrate and how do they migrate. And now we have papers reflecting on gender, on the consequences of migration, on the policy responses, much more on the legal frameworks, but also, and that's interesting, the appearance of critical papers trying to theorize this, to put this in the framework of post-colonial studies, for example, or of gender studies. And I would say that to me this is a renewed aspect, the new theorization of this field.
If climate change or other factors then force you to move, where would you go? How would you make that decision? Who's going to pay? These are the questions that we need to know from the people's perspective.
And lower rainfall have combined to reduce water flow by up to 40 kilometers of groundwater, with only 0.3% of fresh water being found in rivers. However, there is need for innovation.
And so this exhibition is about trying to see how art can engage and utilise those images, utilise documentary footage, utilise first-hand witness footage, and incorporate that into artistic processes so it's represented to audiences in a very different way, and in a way where we lose that little gloss or that separation that we always maintain between ourselves and those realities, those images that we're so used to seeing.
The content's been really, really thought-provoking, and I think for many of our visitors has perhaps raised questions about connections between migration, climate change, and perhaps whether there is anything which we can do to address these issues. So I think in terms of provoking thought and hopefully provoking action, it's been a really exciting project to be involved with.
Each of the exhibits, each of the installations was an invitation to the viewer to think about migration and climate change for perhaps the first time, and to think about climate and migration not as something to fear, but as a human experience.
We've been working on a long-term story on the river Brahmaputra. At various stages of the river, we came across erosion and what it meant to people, how it displaced people. And the bulk of the work that's being shown is from an island called Nijumdeep, which literally translates into the island of silence. It's one of the most remote islands in the Bay of Bengal, and an island that is very vulnerable for various reasons. It had also been ravaged by a recent cyclone. And when we arrived, we came across people who'd set up temporary homes, having been initially washed away from their homes because of erosion, then their homes having been destroyed because of the cyclone, and then facing yet another cyclone.
What was good about these photographs that I have seen, many of those faces, and they're real people, and their expression, is so real. You can feel. So and then our response, what we thought that the first thing we came that these people, they always fight on. They don't give up, and that really inspired us. So we need to show their resilience. Yeah. So that's why we use some green leaves in a plastic bottle. That plastic bottle was like a symbol of the consumer society.
Consumer society. Actually, those plastic bottles in Asia, Bangladesh, India, they actually used so many times, recycled. The families actually live on those sort of things. They earn money by recycling stuff, and at the same time they are in the bottle. Recycled them life in there, but they're still fighting. They're still, living their life, doing their jobs.
Their life is sort of trapped by the consumer society and their behavior, and but they still fight on, and they carry on with their lives.
I mean, the impact of the flood were so bad also because of the fact of because there is big deforestation in these areas.
Their ability to kind of grow their own food is also gone. So in a sense, they've become this almost a kind of a neoliberal kind of parody. They move straight.
The content of the conference was really important for my work within civil society, because you can't do activism, you can't do campaigning without political theory, because you have to understand what it is that you're advocating for, and you have to understand the political institutions and structures that might be preventing that from happening. So without theory, without political theory, you're basically doing activism in the dark.
Migration happens, so our responsibility as this community is to help governments and institutions find ways to make sure that if people move, that they do so in safety and dignity.
10 years ago, it was still very much a niche, environmental migration, and now it's really a kind of mainstream issue in the way we think about the interactions between the humans and their environment.
It comes from different perceptions.
So the conference was really about trying to open up the debate, allowing new voices into the debate, voices that might not otherwise get heard as within the academic discussion. So that was really the intention.
When you hear so many narratives and voices and research work, it gives you several insights. There's a birth of many insights in you, and you've been influenced and inspired by those ideas.
The term environmental refugee was coined in 1985, when empires exploded onto the world and colonies and empires were created. The claim of indigenous peoples.
The loss and damage question is, what about the impacts that we can neither prevent or adapt to? So the kind of issues, the kind of destruction that there is really no way of us stopping and no way of us adapting to. So that's a huge question. And what we were looking at today was what kind of responsibilities does that create for the high-emitting countries, so the countries that are firstly responsible for most of the emissions, but also are wealthier.
Neoliberal rationality, proliferating global slums and refugee camps, including those populated by so-called climate refugees.
The question that we invited people to consider was really a question about power. Who has the power to define the terms of the debate? Who has the power to decide upon what types of knowledge are considered to be legitimate within the context of the debate?
Some projects undertaken to mitigate the effects of climate change may in effect displace people by forcing them to.
These 3 days I've been exposed to all sort of, presentation, theory of migration. I've seen, artists also, doing their own bit in relation to migration. So for me, all these are multidisciplinary experiences which I think will guide my work.
A lot of the times people have heard just different ways of how migration and climate change have been put across and all that, but sometimes it's easier to look at a picture or to hear a poem or to hear a song talking about migration or climate change, whatever, instead of just the normal sitting in an auditorium and listening to some scientist going on and on and on about terminology that you've got no idea of. So as artists, I think it's our duty and responsibility more than anything to create work that resonates with people, that people can understand.
The poetic sensibility that we're threaded through would provide that space for feeling, which sometimes a lecture format can't allow, because certainly in a Eurocentric tradition of lecturing, the idea is that you relate to the information, you engage your cognitive faculties. Of course, there are many people who break those rules of all hues and all backgrounds, but there is a risk of appealing to the rational, the cognitive, over the whole body, over the lived experience of those facts.
One of my key concerns, both as an artist and a journalist and an activist, when trying to tell stories of the subaltern, is that their stories almost invariably get reduced to numbers. Statistics are how we describe them. figures, reports are how they're depicted, very rarely are they personal stories. Very rarely do they talk about individual human beings, their passions, their beliefs, their emotions.
She employed shrewd business practices, such as buying clothes and utensils from towns nearby to pay people who work in her field with it.
We kind of came up with the idea of using Nigel Hewlett's films that I'd watched before. I mean, the films literally took me back because some of the things that the people that were being interviewed were saying, I knew exactly what they were talking about. You know, the whole idea of how the rainy seasons have changed, how certain fruits that used to grow on certain trees aren't there anymore. Those trees don't exist anymore. You know, whereby sometimes fruit is supposed to grow at a certain season, it doesn't grow in that particular season, and the heat is absolutely unbearable. You know, I know that Zimbabwe has been going through a drought now for quite a while, and because rain has just not been available, it's just not come down when it's supposed to be, because Zimbabwe is supposed to have this rainy season sort of November, December, January time going on to February. But none of that has happened. So that just shows you how much change has happened, you know, with the climate. And people are aware of this. They might not know what it's called, but they've been totally aware that things aren't the way they used to be. So for me, that really struck a chord with me, because I know exactly what they talk about. I grew up in the rural areas, and, you know, the stuff that they're talking of, I know. What I ended up doing was projecting Nigel's films onto a canvas through a projector and filming them on an iPad. So as I was painting, or rather responding to the images that were being projected, the iPad was filming me as I'm creating that work.
And traditional knowledge are slowly disappearing.
We started with a research that we had called The Moving Story. It was a report in terms of the impact that flood and climate change had in their life, and, you know, the difficulty that they were facing because of those kind of problems. I did some research about the kind of media archive that it's out there on internet. You can see it's not like a television report or something. It's something that people, you know, just filmed because it was happening in that moment. And I used these kind of footage, some of them, crossing with the interviews that we had with 3 actors.
There was water of about 2 to 3 feet.
We did not know how to escape.
You hear these stories, and then this footage just hit in, like the way that flood fit in without any, you know, like precaution. And I tried to show that because it's exactly the way that it is. It's like you are sitting in your home, as you hear in these stories. You are sitting in your house or you were sleeping, and suddenly flood started. Suddenly you couldn't go downstairs because of the level of water that you had in your house or around you.
My own installation, Chamada from Chico Mendes, and there are a range of voices. Different artists and filmmakers contributed that footage consciously towards the project, and so the piece itself creates an interface or a playback system for people to be able to view that different kind of, all those different bits of footage.
Knowing full well that we're going to have serious problems with regards to food.
It provides a very playful way, using musical hitting and instruments and objects related to how we consume you know, carbon emitting products, and people can hit those products and objects and actually influence the way the footage plays back within this kind of mask, this humanized mask.
The Chico Mendes homage in the Durham Art Gallery, and again I just thought this is just so good. You know, a white cube space which you'd made interactive. It was very unusual. I mean, to be able to make sounds that change images, it was very engaging. It probably allowed, I would imagine, a lot of new people to enter into these kinds of questions who might not have done because you used very, very creative thinking in the putting together that installation.
The 8 Ogoni leaders who are executed with Ken Saro-Wiwa, there's the polluted environment.
The fact that in Ogoniland, which at its height probably had 700,000 inhabitants, this is a very small place, but actually very few people can live there now because people can't subsist. So most people have to live in Port Harcourt. And the campaign is to restitute the land, to rehabilitate the land, to enable people to move back from Port Harcourt and elsewhere to Ogoniland and to start their lives again. And then there was the 20th anniversary since the executions of Ken Saro-Wiwa and the Ogoni 8, who had been protesting against Shell and Chevron's devastating activities in the Niger Delta, and who were murdered in 1995 by the Nigerian government. I approached Cy Murray, who's a performance poet and activist, and said, look, there's something we can do here to create an engagement through artistic process plus factual information that could engage the audience in a new way. We should try and do something that isn't a lecture, that isn't a performance, that is somewhere between. And the other poetry piece was a video made of poet Selina Nwulu called Home is a Hostile Lover. Selina's poem was very much looking at the impossibility of living in anywhere called home if you've been displaced, if you've been violated. And she connected to the migrations crossing the Mediterranean. She connected to her own experience as a first generation British born woman of Nigerian parents.
The ocean leaves its offcuts when sated, and I am left a half-lit emblem.
Yeah, and we also presented a really important film called Exit by Dilla, Scofidio and Renfro. They were commissioned some years back by the Cartier Foundation to produce a piece of work based on a lot of climate change data and migration data. That was originally created as a kind of large-scale immersive video installation, and we represented that as a film. Exit is strangely evocative, using the soundtrack and show a global map with a number of different movements and patterns and representations of the statistics, and somehow the soundtrack creates this evocation of people's movements and the humanity underneath those statistics.
It's got to be a discussion about race, class and power when you talk about the environment. It falls unequally. Just as in Tower Hamlets across the road has the most disproportionate levels of asthma and lung conditions, and yet the lowest car ownership in London.
It wasn't your typical polar bears in the snow, or, you know, the general stuff that you'd normally get about climate change, or even migration at that. So you didn't get pictures of or photographs of people in hordes and hordes, you know, migrating through from one place to another place.
And people who kind of come to visit those places even, not just particularly for seeing the exhibition or this, you know, artworks. You could see different kind of people, different kind of age, different kind of background.
I think it's been a really, really exciting project which crosses boundaries between arts and sciences and social sciences, and also works really, really, really well in terms of bringing in completely new audiences.
The projected images in the Oriental Museum, beautiful, large format projected images of people going about their daily lives, for example, in Bangladesh. You know, presenting to us in large format the humanity of the other, as it were. That's a really profound thing, I think, for people. And when they're invited to look at an image like that as, you know, an image of climate change, for example, I think it really shifts the way that people think about climate change. It says climate change is not a technical issue. It's not an obscure policy or legal issue, but it's a human issue, and it involves the lives of people. And I think that's partly what the art exhibition was trying to bring to people's attention.
I wanted to really push the diversity and the plurality of who was creating the artwork, the levels at which they were creating it, where they're from, the geographical and cultural regions that they're from and that they kind of represent, and the kind of cultural background that informs their way of thinking. I wanted to diversify and pluralize the kinds of places where it was shown, the different kinds of people who would be participating in showing it or in the events. I wanted to have a range of different ways in which people could come into the dialogues that the art presents. So we had a lot of discussion sessions, a really wide range of discussion sessions in different venues. The project had 3 exhibition spaces: the Oriental Museum, Durham Art Gallery and the Miners' Hall. The Miners' Hall is the historical centre for the Durham Miners Association, which is an incredible context and audience for the work. We had Dave Douglas, a really interesting ex-miner and trade unionist who collaborated with us in a discussion event where he was bringing in class and miners' issues.
And people from the coal communities have started coming back and defending that history and their roots.
We also used Durham University for the public screening of the exit film. And then there was the artist-run space known as Empty Shop, used for Platforms Performance Night. We had a pretty strong collaboration with local environmentalists from Transition Durham, who did a mini event as a part of the platform performance at Empty Shop, looking at issues of divestment from fossil fuels. That involved a film screening with discussion and poetry.
Provide a platform on which to force the issue.
Another session unpacked the can of worms that is art and activism. That panel involved the cultural critic and researcher Janet Stewart from the Centre for Visual Arts and Culture in Durham.
Voices into a particular situation, and we've seen a really lovely example of how.
And then, of course, we had a panel where the artists themselves looked at the process, the aesthetics, and the politics within their own
whatever
work.
they need to do and go back and uplift their countries.
Being part of this exhibition is quite exciting for me. This is a wonderfully eclectic show with people from various parts of the globe with different art practices being combined. More importantly, I think it is important that these individual acts of resistance be seen as part of a much wider movement towards social equality, and that we begin to work collectively, because these issues are not unique to Bangladesh. I mean, they will be present in different forms, in different reincarnations, in different places. But at the end of the day, it's this human fabric and the vulnerability of some of us that is what this story is about. And I think a show such as this begins to make those connections.
So the Biophilia project aims to try and encourage staff and students to go out and monitor the wildlife that we've got around here, so we have a better understanding of what's here, and also to get them to engage with it. We've erected about 100 nest boxes through the woodlands that surround the university site. We've actually got funding to put up infrared cameras to detect nocturnal mammals. We've got an online website where people can go online, crowdsource and identify things without actually having to go outdoors. And we're also doing things like guided walks.
It's what beech trees do. Once they get to that sort of age, the fungus does get into them.
The guided walks is largely to engage staff, so a lot of people don't realise the amazing wildlife that they've got just outside their office. So we take people out on a lunchtime and just show them some of the things that are around here.
Yeah, you normally get the woodpeckers upon that.
It's been fantastic to learn that there's so much happening so near to the offices and so near to the university buildings.
Another important part of the project is to engage students. Bring bits of the local wildlife into the classroom. So we've had students doing projects looking at things like how to prioritise protecting species that occur around the site, for example.
Is that very hard to
tricky.
protect if it's in a residential area?
If you just read about something, it doesn't go in as well. Whereas actually having the environment around and being able to associate what I'm learning with something that I see every day makes it a lot easier to take it in and learn it in the long run.
Once we have a really good understanding of what's around here, we can know areas that we should try and avoid if the university wants to develop in future. And we've also got things like the BBC Spring Watch. We're going to be doing something similar. Durham's got a really well-known cultural heritage, but its natural heritage is perhaps less appreciated. So it's making people aware of what's here as much as anything else, because there's all these amazing things just on the doorstep of the university. And for the most part, people don't realise that they're there, so it's just raising their awareness.
The main aims of the project were to provide a central location for the co-location of student-facing services and also professional services. Some of the drivers for the project were to rejuvenate some old spaces, unused areas, bring new life to older buildings. The library, for an example, has a fantastic extension provided. Also refurbish the main entrance in there, creating new entrances. Also, the new development along Stockton Road has created a link to the city centre itself and also ties in, we feel, quite well with the historic nature of the city. The centrepiece of the Gateway project is the Palatine Centre, and the Palatine Centre includes a host range of green technologies that were introduced into the scheme. These include air source heat pumps, photovoltaics. There was also green roofs introduced, also solar water collectors providing hot water for the catering facility. All went forward to provide a BREEAM rating of an excellent, which is the first time that has happened for the university. Some of the key benefits that we've seen have been the improvement on student experience. Also, working practices for the staff have vastly improved.
I think what we've gained from it really is a huge synergy between all of the different departments, so it's much easier to get access to colleagues, to talk to them formally and informally.
The Gateway project also involves the modernisation of the Science Site campus, pedestrianising the site, creating hub spaces for students and also staff to enjoy informally, whilst also enjoying a great deal of public art that's on show.
We're an old university in a modern environment now, and an environment that is accessible to all.
The whole area just looks as if the university is committed to greening its activities. And it does mean now that every time a new project comes up, sustainability is always at the forefront in terms of the discussion.